Welcome back to News at Prime. So there are now less than 48 hours to go until the U.S. presidential elections. My colleague Xoli Mngambi is monitoring the crucial polls from Washington D.C. and he joins us live now for more on what we can expect from him also later this evening. Xoli, at this point, is there a palpable sense now that these elections are really just 2 days away?
Now, Lady, you are spot on because we've been talking about a countdown of the last 48 hours and right next to me is our senior Washington correspondent, a face that you are very familiar with by now, Simon Marks. And Simon, the conversation with Naledi it's now getting palpable. So I want us to start with the election campaign. Whose campaign is looking stronger than the other, and what could be the reasons?
You know, it's been an absolute roller coaster, as you know, this election, and it has consumed America for most of the past year. Tension, anxiety, unforeseen events like President Joe Biden being forced from the race, Kamala Harris suddenly taking over, a real test for America. Is it possible for a political party to replace a candidate that late in the race? Many people thought it wasn't, which is why some of the Democratic Party grandees, even back in the spring, were arguing that we're stuck with Joe Biden. There's nothing we can do. You can't possibly get rid of him. Yeah. As soon as Kamala Harris entered that race, for grassroots Democrats, there was just this tremendous sense of relief and an upswing in enthusiasm for the campaign and to get involved and to get out the vote. And so I think there is no question that what we have witnessed over the last month, in the closing month of this campaign, is Kamala Harris catching fire on the ground, but Donald Trump on occasion outmaneuvering her. The visit to McDonald's, you know, manning the French fry unit at McDonald's, doling out the burgers through the drive-through window, going to North Carolina to talk to victims of Hurricane Helene, sitting down in a Bronx barbershop in New York, not a competitive state for the Republicans, but sitting down in a Bronx barbershop and talking to black American voters about their concerns, while at the time Kamala Harris was down there in the White House for a couple of days, holed up, trying to determine exactly what the topography of the end of her campaign would look like. Then the missteps that we've seen by Trump over the last week, the racism at Madison Square Gardens, the row over garbage that we saw consuming the campaign, the Puerto Rico, the suggestion that Liz Cheney, the former Republican congresswoman from Wyoming, should be put in front of a firing squad. Suddenly that's given Kamala Harris fresh energy. And all the polling, including today's, just published in the New York Times Sunday edition, suggests this is neck and neck, and it would be rash to make a projection for who's going to win.
That's a conversation we're actually going to have a little later about why it is that this is neck and neck, and what does it say about the American democracy and the American society, because you have two very distinct candidates. One is a convicted felon, and the other is someone who has risen up the legal ranks, goes to the Senate, and now deputy president. And so for some observers, there should be a very clear line for why Americans should choose Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. But I want us to talk about the swing states, because that's where the campaign is focused now. It's the last stretch. How important are these, and perhaps factor in the Electoral College?
Well, they're absolutely crucial. I mean, on that issue of why Kamala Harris isn't streaks ahead of Donald Trump, that is confounding to Democrats. They can't understand it. They think she should be 12 to 15 percentage points clear of him, and instead it's absolutely neck and neck. And that's mostly because in an American presidential election, you don't just have to win more votes than your rival. You have to win them in the right places. And those places are the swing states, the battlegrounds that sometimes vote Republican, sometimes vote Democratic. But because of the Electoral College, they always decide the outcome of the election. The Electoral College is that process created by the Constitution that sits between the voters and the outcome of the election. This is not a winner-takes-all election nationally. It's a winner-take-all election in each individual state, and what the winner is getting is members of that 538-seat electoral college. So 538 electors in the electoral college. You've got to have 270 of them in the bag to win, which is why this is often called a race to 270.
Yeah.
And you can only get to 270 by picking up those electors in these all-important swing states.
I want to interrupt your thought process there, because talking about these swing states, Pennsylvania, there has been a repeat visit by these two
Yes.
candidates to that particular state. Not to say that the 6 others are not important, but why is Pennsylvania so important?
Because they both think that's where the election's going to be decided, and they think that's where it's going to be decided because it has happened before. We know, for example, that the votes of women in the Philadelphia suburbs can be make or break in a very, very closely contested election. You have to remember that in 2016 and 2020, the determining factor as to who gets to sit in the Oval Office there was a difference of between 45 and 75,000 votes in those 2 elections. It's a tiny number of votes in a country with 162 million registered voters, and the candidates are gambling. It's all going to come down to Pennsylvania, and maybe even to those very specific suburbs that they can identify.
And I was reading just a few days ago as we prepared for this broadcast, Simon, that in Pennsylvania also sits a very large population of Ukrainians, and that community as well, looking to decide who might be the best candidate with their interest at heart because of what is going on back home, and that talks to issues of foreign policy.
So that speaks to Ukrainian voters, Ukrainian Americans who may well be backing Kamala Harris because they think that Donald Trump, if he gets into office, is going to force President Volodymyr Zelensky to accept that he's got to give up Crimea, he's got to give up the east of Ukraine. But also, in Pennsylvania, 500,000 Puerto Ricans. And the idea that the Trump campaign last Sunday allowed that comedian at Madison Square Gardens to make a racist joke about Puerto Ricans not only enraged the community nationally, enraged the community in Pennsylvania, but it also activated Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo, on her feet at that rally in Las Vegas on Thursday night. All she has to do is to shift a few votes from Trump to Harris, or the undecided voters to Harris, and equally by emphasizing foreign policy issues like Ukraine, the Harris campaign can do the same thing with Ukrainian Americans living there.
And those celebrity endorsements, they have not gone unnoticed. Let's finish it off on this point, Simon. At the moment, there's big worry, security speaking, that there could be some kind of eruption of violence post the election, and that is if Donald Trump decides not to accept the vote. And let's not forget that we are sitting right next to one of the buildings that was stormed on January 6th.
Well, look, I think we know enough about Donald Trump to know that assuming he doesn't win the election, let's say he loses the election, he is not going to accept the outcome. He's already lawyered up. Harris is lawyered up. The Trump campaign is already bringing lawsuits related to election integrity. They've got 100,000 election integrity observers. The Republicans are mobilizing all over the country to look for problems with the way the voting has gone. So for this to avoid the prospect, the possibility, and we don't want to over-egg it, but the possibility of confrontation on the streets, Harris has to win in an absolute landslide. Otherwise, Trump is going to be in a position where he is going to say, this was rigged, this was cheated, I was cheated out of victory again, and we will be back exactly where we were in January of 2021, with one exception. He's not president. He's a former president. And outside the bully pulpit of that Oval Office down there, he's going to be less capable, perhaps, of stirring people up. And, you know, they had no luck in the courts in 2020. 60 courtrooms across the country threw out their claims. You may well see something very similar develop here.
Very, very interesting indeed. Simon Marks, a senior Washington correspondent, giving us the lay of the land here, Naledi. And it is also important to just finish off on the point he's made that Kamala Harris, for this to be a convincing win, she has to almost win with a clear majority. How do you do that when the polls are saying it is neck and neck for Donald Trump not to claim electoral fraud. In the next hour, we're going to take you to New York. That's one of the important states. Yes, it might not be a battleground state, but nonetheless, Donald Trump lives there. By the way, we'll talk to Jody Jacobs in that particular hour. But first, let's take a break.